then you realize that how much you blokes actually did, the regiments, the different RRs. They were involved in a lot of shit, in a
You
lot
guys
of
had a very
stuff,
good trekking team.
Yeah, I must say we enjoyed that very much. I did. We had a support platoon with 2 tracking call signs, and I loved that.
Hi guys, I'm here today for lunch in Bergfleet with Martin and Stuart, Billy, Lawrence and Hannes, and we're going to be having lunch together and just chatting generally. So let me introduce you to the guys.
Martin, 5th Battalion, Rhodesian Regiment.
Hi there guys, Stu Hodgson, ex-RLI and Salute Scouts.
Hi guys, Billy Boshoff, Salute Scouts the whole time. Thanks.
Oh,
Lawrence Costain, Salute Scouts all the time.
Hannes Wessels, ex-RLI and 4RL.
Was the Tracker Combat Unit, which was formerly run by Alan Savory. He was the captain under the auspices of the School of Infantry, and they were based at Kariba at the Heights, where they ran various tracking courses for the army. They also did a survival course, I think, for the Air Force and things like that. Then with the formation of Salute Scouts in 73, the regular side kicked off in 73 after the initial work done by SB and some of the SAS guys, Andre Rabi, Stretch Franklin, those guys. Then in 74, probably about May, June 74, the Salute Scouts TA, Territorial Army, was formed. And that was ostensibly, in the beginning, that was a tracker unit. So the TCU, the Tracker Combat Unit that Alan Savory had started, he'd left by then. He got into politics and he left. Don Price was the OC at the time, and I think prior to that, or still involved, was Nigel Lenson. He was also involved, I think. So originally what Savory had done, and he'd spent about 20 years as a soldier, sort of perfecting or honing the tracker into combat sort of scenario. Did a lot of training, used mostly park sport guys and hunters, professional hunters and farmers, blokes that were on the ground. He formed a unit that nobody really knows about. It was called GATU, which was the Guerrilla Anti-Terrorist Unit. And that didn't really get traction. So when that was folded, Part 2, the BSAP then formed Part 2, which was the Police Anti-Terrorist Unit, which would have been the GATU. And the Tracker Combat Unit was formed, where the emphasis was on tracking, basically tracking into combat or into contact, and with it went, the emphasis was on good soldiering, basic infantry soldiering, working in small teams. So the selection, the Salute Scouts TA selection, was the end of the TCU, where those members of the TCU were invited to come across and do the selection, as well as some national servicemen based at Kariba at the time, at 2 in-depth. So myself, some of the blokes were Pipey Tauti, Ian Ritchie, Fred Rayhard, if I remember. Those are the chaps that made it. So the initial selection was based at Chirara, with Pete Clements as an instructor, Ant White, the colour sergeant, John Ashburner, Bruce Bartlett, and I think Marius Kok, Bushpick Kok was probably there as well. and the emphasis there was on tracking. It wasn't anything like the later courses. So there the emphasis was more on tracking, four-man teams, and basically, combat soldiery, tracking into combat or into a contact, and then working with your follow-up troops. So the basic concept was your tracker on spoor, the controller behind him, which was the link and the liaison between the tracker and the follow-up troops, and then two flanks. So the terrain normally determined the follow-up troops, whether they were in extended line or in file, or sometimes in single file. There were times when we were actually trotting on tracks and everybody in a straight line behind you, and then branching out. Later on, when Fire Force came into it and we were still tracking, it was great because your Fire Force had your machine gunners and sticks and that. So if you got two chopper loads, then you put one on the right, one on the left, and you just went. It was great tracking into contact days. The initial selection, I can't remember how many blokes were on it, but I have a figure of about 25 to maybe 30 that passed, and that formed the nucleus of the Zulu Scouts Territorial Army initially. From there, as time went by, and the criteria for the type of soldier we were looking for changed, and they started identifying various other sort of call it skills or that you wanted. So the selection changed. Ours was quite strenuous, but it wasn't anywhere as strenuous, and it wasn't as long as the later ones that you guys went on. It definitely wasn't. But the interesting thing is that the guys from that early course, they formed the core of basically of the tracker sort of concept, and I think one's got to give them credit, because it's blokes that are in there that stayed the course, that stayed right to the end, that passed on a hell of a lot of their experiences.
Out of interest, did you ever meet a huge bugger called Donnie Botha?
No.
Massive hands.
I can't remember Donnie Botha.
He was one of the early tracker combat unit guys.
Possibly, no.
And I remember we used to be in the same church. And he had like a way of shaking your hand that he'd close his hand before you'd fully engaged.
Yeah.
And I remember once I was newly married and my wedding ring came back square.
The vice grip. At the end of the whole war, call it 79, there was probably about 50%, maybe just a shade over 50% of the original blokes from what I call the original selection that had stayed the course and were still in Scouts, which I think was quite commendable. And I'm thinking of blokes like the Bulawayo guys, three group, Pete Abbott, Gary MacDonald, Al Grierson. Luke Corby came in later. He was on a later selection. Al Grierson. The last camp assault that I was on was a para assault in Zambia, and 16-man stick in the DAC, 4 sticks full, and each one of the stick leaders, to a lesser or a greater extent, had been instructors somewhere along the line. So collectively, we probably had about 20 years experience, and that counts. That counts on a thing like that. That was a Zipra camp, N2, I think it was NC2, and they were gearing up then. It was 79, the end of 79. They were then gearing up for that big push. So those guys were pretty jacked up, and that's where you wanted that experience. You needed that experience to carry it through. It also made it a lot easier when you put your sticks together, because you basically start you've got a DAC, you've got 16 jumpers, We've got 4 stick leaders. You want a machine gun in each one, so that's sort of self-selecting. You have a look and see who's there, who's going to be your MAG gunner. He's got his favourite 2IC that he works with, and then you've only got to find one other bloke, and that could be, say, a medic, a signaller, or somebody like that, and then you would split it. You'd split your duties, and it all went without a host of orders and anything. It was just one bloke would do medics, the other guy would do logistics, one would look after the radios, and that was it. You would then fly off, get to it.
What attack was this, Billy?
It was NC2.
Where was that?
It was about 60 k's north of, probably between Vic, I would say more Decker, probably north of Decker. And that was the infiltration route that they were coming, and they were shoring up all along the Zambezi and then down on the Botswana side as well. So
This was 79.
79, yeah. The interesting thing there, if one is to look in the book, the Men Speak, Zulu Scouts by Jonathan Pittaway, he writes it up quite nicely there. Well, Roddy Smith, who was the captain, he writes it up. And the very interesting thing about that was that Edward Pirangoro, who was commissioned later, no, before that, he was already commissioned then, I think. He had done the initial recce and determined that there were about 63 people in the camp. So we geared up for that. It was that area, northern Maribiland, was an RAR area. It was their responsibility. And I'm not quite sure what happened, but the RAR stick that was there to keep tabs on this whole camp sent back a November Tango Romeo report every day prior to us going in. When we jumped, we found out, there were also, so interesting there, the normal modus operandi was changed, where we were told that the Zipra guys were getting quite sharp, and they realized that if there were parachuters coming in, those would be the stop lines, and the assaults were normally the heliborne. So they would run away from the helicopters towards the descending parachutes. It gave them more time to get in underneath them while the blokes were still shaking out, and they could make good their escape that way. So we changed it around. So the main assault was in fact the paradroppers, the paratroopers coming in, and the stop groups. So the idea was that we were going to hit the ground, they were going to come running into us, and if we did manage to turn them around, the stop groups would stop them. But on our descent, on the way down, I remember looking down and just thinking, hang on, there's a hell of a lot more than 63 people here. There were lots of people running, and aggressive. I mean, they were well trained. They took us on. So somewhere that whole int had gone wrong, and anyway, we landed. We started the assault. We went through. We were pinned down, and had to get the links in to come and help us. Fortunately, the guys were in a 14-7, and they couldn't, on an anthill, and they couldn't get the elevation down, so they were shooting the branches and the sticks off above us, and we were in that little envelope. So, and then unfortunately, what happened? There was also barbed wire entanglements which we didn't expect. So we didn't carry any sight cutters or pliers or anything. It wasn't there on the initial recce. So we had to work our way through this lot, get the blokes through. And then while we were still sort of shaking out and getting guys through, Bill Wixley, it was his last op. He'd already handed in all his kit. And then he basically begged and asked to come just one more time. And so, he had experience. He was an older guy, he had experience. So we took him, and he was lying next to me. And just as we were ready to throw the white foss and advance, And I looked at him. He just said, "Cheers, Billy," and put his head down. And he'd been shot through the heart. So we carried on. We did the assault. We overran the position, and then on the sweep on the way back, we noticed steps cut into the back of the anthill, and one of the chaps went up there and dug in at the top of the anthill. Was a hole, and in there sat a sniper with a Dragunov, and he was shooting down at us. So that was the first time we came across that. So it was also quite an innovative way, and that was a typical zipper way. And that guy stood his ground. He could have done a lot more damage, and that, yeah.
Sitting here, I'm so enthralled by all of this because it's a dimension which is not part of my experience. You know, we started really feeling the pinch toward the end. I'd say the last year or so. The shortage of men was so chronic that we really couldn't take anybody out of the unit that I was in and send them away on tracking courses. So, for myself personally, I had to learn, as it were, on the job. But I was very fortunate that initially we had National Parks and Wildlife trackers with us. And these guys were also called up in the same way that we were, because they were civilians, game rangers. And guys like Barry Bull, very well-known man in wildlife conservation. In fact, he goes right back to Operation Noah, his experience there.
Yeah, I remember that.
Wonderful man, really. And Clem Coetzee.
Oh, Fothergill.
Yeah.
Rupert Fothergill.
Yes. Clem was an excellent guy, really. He knew his stuff. So I was very fortunate to spend time with those kind of men. But then after a while, we didn't have them any longer. When I'd be called up, you'd see less and less white faces, and even the trackers were no longer Europeans. We had Chongons with us, who were also civilians, and I think their origins are very much in what Billy has spoken about. They were provided to the army, and they were quite good, but you know, you had to watch them, and I think I related this in one of my videos. You know, you couldn't, being a tracker controller, I could never have the attitude that, well, it's not my job to track. I had to learn to do it because I had to watch them as well as everything else that was going on. I've always envied guys that have gone on formal tracking courses. So it's nice for me to sit and listen to the history of all of this. Occasionally we'd go in, we'd get called up and we'd have a few days pre-mobilization training. And guys like Dale Collett and Ant White would come along and speak to us. But I really got the impression as I listened to them that they weren't really there to train us in tracking. They were recruiting. And but for me, I did not believe that I would be able to get through the selection course. So I never made the effort to do that. Besides, I was already tracking then, and I was enjoying it. And
I noticed you nodding your head quite vigorously
Yeah.
when Billy first started talking.
Yeah, I was listening to, as he was talking about the formations and the compositions of the follow-up sticks and that, all very familiar to me.
Yeah.
You know, we had two trackers, MAG gunner and myself, and that was it. And the theory, as Billy said, was that, you know, you do the tracking and then you call in for support when you need it, but it didn't work that way, you know, when you contacted them.
You know, the funny thing was my dad taught me how to track when I was a youngster hunting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I also never had any formal training, but never had any problem following tracks, you know. And from a hunting point of view, you know, to see what the buck is doing, where, even to tell from the color of the blood where you've shot the thing. Is it lung blood? Is it, you know, have you shot it in the liver? Have you shot it in the heart? You know?
Right, doing national service in stationed at Kariba, 1974, and intake 137. We were having lunch one day in the canteen in the dining hall, and these guys walk in with civvies, and they said, "We need to speak to you guys. Do you want to join selection, do a selection course, and join Salute Scouts?" And we didn't know anything about them, who they were, what they were, and nobody put their hands up, you know. And so they were saying, one guy put his hand up and said, "What's the benefits?" You know, because we're national service, we want to do as little call up as possible. You know, so the guy said, "Well, you don't wear uniform." So I thought, there's a plus. You can grow your hair. I thought, cool. And they said, you can tell us which months you want to do call up. And wow, that was, you know. And so I put my hand up. And a lot of guys put their hands up, and our commanding officer decided who would go and who wouldn't go. And just ended up going on this course, the Scout course. And we were actually based at Kariba in our barracks like normal. And we would get taken out every morning on a truck into the bush and do all sorts of information about the trees, you know, plant stuff you could eat, the insects, and every day you'd have to find lunch, you know, go and catch something or find something to eat, or we would catch ligabons or whatever there was to catch, and you know, and then they chose how to cook it, you know, and then we'd eat it, and then we'd come back that afternoon, and then they'd say to us, okay, now you got to do this, you know, the training part of it. And at that stage, I don't even know if Waffa existed or anything, but we trained below Pete Clemence's house. He had built an assault course on the side of the hill, and we did assault courses there every morning. And you'd be sitting into groups, you know, and you had to try and get over there as quicker than the other group. And we worked out a way that what you do is you send your fastest guys first, and then your slowest guy behind, and you help them along. Because otherwise, these guys didn't work it out. Your slowest guy, if you come after him, that's going to take you longer. So we worked out how to get the fast guys across and get them to help the slow guys. And we would always win, you know, this thing, and you had benefits. Anyway, then after we had finished all that training and we passed through it, they took us out one day to do some tracking. They had these, what they call magochas, that would lay tracks, and then you'd follow these tracks, and you'd take it in turn, following tracks, and then another guy would track, and the one day we were coming back from that on the truck, back of the RL, and as we're coming back, a car in front of us just screams off the road. The guy jumps out and starts to fire with a handgun into the bush, and the instructors say, "Hey, contact! You guys get ready." And so they pull us off the side of the road, and we get under cover, and they say, "Okay, let's get close to this guy." We get close to the guy, and he says, "These guys trying to attack me." Anyway, it was a whole setup. No, nothing. And now we have a track, so we're tracking these guys as if they real, you know, gooks and everything, and we're so excited. This is going to be our first contact, and we tracked them all the way right up to the river, to where they were going to cross just before the river. And then they said, "Okay, guys, no more now. This is the end of it." And they brought, you know, the flash hiders that that thing you put in the front.
Yeah.
And then they give you blanks.
Yes.
So we had to do a whole attack now on these guys and everything. But they were watching everything. You know, I mean, one of the guys next to me, the Mapani flies all over him. So he took a cigarette, a match, and he lit some elephant dung. And he's sitting in elephant dung getting the smoke on him so that the Mapani flies are away. And they're watching all of this. And so at the end of it, they would just say, "Okay, you guys, you go home." And all the time they're watching these things as you're in the bush.
Just having Stu here, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about one of the great Salute Scout actions, in my view, which was to rescue prisoners that were being held under exceptionally harsh conditions up in Zambia. A lot of them were Rhodesians, black Rhodesians, who'd actually been abducted from their homes, I think, in Rhodesia, and were being held up there. Others were dissidents, I gather, who were reluctant, who were showing resistance to commitment to the cause. So they were being, they were in a prison there. The recce was done by Tim Callow, and I think, I'm not sure who the Black Scout was, but it's a great story, and having Stu here, good time to tell it.
I think there were something like 78, might have even been more, they weren't Rhodesian soldiers. Most of them were Rhodesians, but what had happened, they'd been captured while going back home for R&R.
That's right.
And they'd been identified as sellouts and taken back into Zambia. And Mbarama camp was, I think it was about 120 k's into Zambia.
Yeah.
And they were all being kept in underground prisons.
Yeah, that's right. They
Underground
were in
prisons.
these dungeons.
Dungeons, yeah. Tim was obviously the main guy who did the recce, but yeah, we, as you've explained, I mean, there were, I can't remember the exact figure, but there were a lot of Rhodesian guys that did, policemen, for example, who had gone back to their villages for R&R and
Been abducted.
yeah, working for district commissioners and whatever, and they'd been taken back to Zambia and imprisoned at this camp called Mbarama. So obviously, with all the input that came back from Tim Keller, an op was put together, and on the day that it was the day that was planned to go in, the weather conditions had been not conducive to being dropped in there, so we jumped it. It was a para assault, and there was such low cloud cover on that particular day. And cut a long story short, I mean, we went ahead with the yacht, and when we came in to drop, we had to get below the cloud cover. So we actually jumped from 300 foot on that day into Mbarama. Now what happened with most of the guys that were being held there, and they were all being held in underground dungeons as prisons. Harsh conditions. And but during the day, half would get taken out and they'd get sent out to the fields to go and do hard labor and stuff like that, and go and till the maize fields and what have you. And the others would just remain on in the dungeons. So anyway, we jumped, and I mean, you know, you can imagine the air time that you had from 300 foot and very low cloud cover, and it was drizzling as well. Roddy Smith was on there up too. Anyway, we hit the ground. Some guys landed in trees, hanging from trees. It was quite a hectic jump. But anyway, we got in, and by the time we got to the actual prison, which was fenced off with sort of chicken wire type of thing, a lot of the Zipper boys had absconded, and we pretty much just walked into the camp and got down into the dungeons, released the guys from these cells that they were being held in. There couldn't have been we were due to be picked up by helicopters, but because of the weather, we had about a 10k walk out until we could get to a position where the choppers could come in, land, and also so we got taken out in choppers. We got taken out in those Provost aircraft. Remember the Provost? It's a fixed wing. Yeah. And we flew out of those in there. But we got those guys back. That was December 1978. We went in on the 23rd of December, and we didn't manage to bring all of them back, but got about, I think it was 28, 29, 30 in that region. The others were out in the fields doing their hard labor. And we managed to bring back about 30 of these guys on the 24th of December 1978. So for them it was the biggest Christmas present of their lives. Even today I'm sure they're still just remember that day.
What happened to the remainder? And to the other prisoners who were on a work party?
I don't know. They were out in the field, so we never ever got to see them.
Apparently, what had happened is Keller picked it up. They'd shot an elephant, and they'd sent a whole lot of the prisoners out there to butcher the elephant. That's why they were out eating this elephant. And if I remember correctly, it was actually they brought a dak in to land at a mission. There was an airstrip near there, and that's what they used to get these bucks
back out. Yeah.
And
there are a lot of photographs of it in it's called Sluiscout's pictorial book. There are a lot of pics of that op in that book.
They were hoping.
I'll send them to you, John.
You know, the press was so anti-Rhodesia at the time, and at that particular time there were a lot of correspondents in the country, and Ron was hoping that this would be a PR coup for the country. Look, you know, we've just gone and rescued these poor buggers from the prison in Zambia, and they got correspondents from all over the world to see what had happened. But what happened then is what's happening today. Nobody wanted to actually carry that story. They told the world that the Salute Scouts were a bunch of murdering racists, and they didn't want to report the fact that
brought these guys
actually rescued some people from a living hell in Zambia. That just didn't wash with the international press. Yeah, it's in a way nothing's changed.
The guy in front of me was carrying a white phos grenade at the end of the FN, and I must have been 2 or 3 paces behind him. And I saw this white phos as he walked through a post of dry sort of bush. White phos sort of got caught onto this bush, and I thought, shit, this bloody pin's being pulled out. And I sort of took one step back, and the next thing, this thing just exploded. And it caught me all over the face. My t-shirt was just burnt to ribbons on the legs, chest. And Joe Deploy, I think it was quick thinking, and he just said, get into the river. And I dived into the river, and obviously you've got to starve it of oxygen, otherwise it just burns and burns. Yeah. So I spent at least bloody 15 minutes in the water until chopper came into Kazabek, and I went off to Antali Hospital, and I spent 10 days in the infectious diseases ward at Antali. But that stuff is dangerous. Jesus. You're not close to water and you can't smother it. So it thrives on us.
Yeah. Dreadful. You know what I think it was a good idea is talking about our Ronry Daly.
Throwaway. It saves the paperwork if you've got to use it.
Okay, guys, so what I've got here is I've got Ronry Daly's whistle and his blue lanyard and button stick, which was used to clean the buttons of your uniform without getting your uniform dirty. That was issued to all the guys who did a staff corps training course, and Leon Jacob says that Acting Corporal Ronry Daly attested a short while before him and received these. Now, how I came to be in possession of these items, Ron was living in Simonstown, and he was dying of cancer. And he needed to keep his medication cold. And the trouble is we were having lots of power cuts and rolling blackouts in those days. And so a few of Ron's loyal supporters got together and donated a generator to Ron. And Chris Watermeyer, who was married to Mal Watermeyer, went to install a generator at Ron's house. And Ron was so grateful for this kind gesture that he gave Chris Watermeyer, who was ex-2 Commando, a regular soldier in 2 Commando, he gave him this whistle and this button stick. Of course, Ron Reed Daly passed away, and in due course, Chris Watermeyer passed away, as is happening to all of us guys these days. And Mal Watermeyer, who's good pals with me, she gave this to me. And so now, for some reason, I have come into possession of Ron Reed Daly's whistle and his button stick.
I have actually no recollection of ever meeting the guy.
No.
No, never. Never got to meet him. I met him after the war at one of the reunions we had at Fishhook. On the beach there.
Yeah.
That thing.
It was about 6 months before you died.
Yeah. It's the first time I ever met the guy. So
Didn't you ever at camp?
never.
No, you basically had two camps. The one was the training troop, where most of the territorials that were called up would muster and be there. And then you had the main camp, which was sort of the regulars and where the admin was done, and the ops room, CQ, MT, they were all at the main camp. So, like Lauren said, a lot of the territorial blokes would come in to the training troop, and then not actually have much to do with main camp.
Yeah.
The vehicles would be prepped and that, and then they would basically come down. Typically in infantry, they would do their rehearsals and their drills and that, and then get onto the infantry vehicles. And then when you came back from an op, it was basically just, stand down. Within the unit, you had different guys doing different things. So, like for example, you had the pseudo operators, and some of the territorial blokes operated with them, which was very interesting. I was fortunate I got on a few who were pseudo ops, and then you had the recce troop, which is almost an autonomous group by themselves. And then you originally had a support group, and then that changed to assault group. So assault group was the bulk of the blokes that were then used on let's say externals, on the external raids and that. And that was bolstered then with regular blokes that were either in the pseudos or in the recce's or whatever. Everybody came together, and and the sort of the blokes that cut their teeth there, guys like Richard Passporters, he when he'd come over, they initially worked in the infantry, looking after the infantry, the assault. But within the columns themselves, you had up front, you always had the pig, or a couple of pigs with the 20 mils, Hispano 20 mil cannons, or they had the 5.0 Brownings, and then so they would be ahead, and that was almost a little group on its own. Then you would have the bulk of the infantry vehicles, India 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever we had, and then at the back you would have the mortar group, the LAD and the medics. So that was, and each column, basically that was the makeup of the column. It just, the numbers changed. and then from there you would have blokes doing demolitions that would then jump off or go to specific targets.